And welcome back to our live coverage of the Mackinac Policy Conference. Of course, we've been talking a lot about education, not only in the state of Michigan, but taking a look at the situation in Detroit, at the charter schools there and the public school system, and what is going to be happening, what the future holds for that. We had a chance to sit down yesterday with Tonya Allen. She's the CEO of the Skillman Foundation, and John Rakolta, he's the CEO of Walbridge, and both of them served on the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children. Take a look. One of the big topics of conversation here at the Mackinac Policy Conference is the future of the Detroit public schools. And joining me right now is the CEO of the Skillman Foundation, Tonya Allen. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Tonya, so great to see you.
Good to see you as well.
And John Rakolta, he's the CEO of Walbridge, but he was also on the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children. Both of you were on that committee a year and a half ago talking about coming up with a plan of where we're going to go with DPS. And it's a year and a half later, and we're still embroiled in a lot of controversy of where the school district should be going, or schooling as a whole, really, in the city of Detroit. So I'm going to start with you, Tonya, and I want you to tell me what your reaction has been in this last year or so of conversations and where we need to get to.
Well, I think my reaction is that I'm so glad that our report and our coming together has really opened up the debate, so that everybody in our city, everybody in our region, everybody in our state are talking about how we improve education. I'm extraordinarily disappointed that it's taken us this long to be able to get some legislative action, and action that really is responsive to our recommendations and what we believe will actually improve schooling for all children that go to both Detroit public schools as well as public charters.
I think what's disappointing, John, is it feels like that in Michigan we have to be pushed to the edge. It has to be to a final drop-dead date before we ever get anything done here. Talk to me about the conversations that you've had in the last 4 months or so about reforms for DPS and for education as a whole in the city.
I'd be happy to. So today, I want to first say we made a lot of progress. I don't want to lose sight of that. We started out 18 months ago with a clean slate, and the biggest issue then was the debt. And we essentially have an agreement on the debt today. The problem is that as we began to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, we began to realize that the problems were much more substantial than we originally imagined. And today where the frustration comes in is that we can't find a solution on basically two big issues.
All right, what are those big issues?
Is the extra $200 million to reinvest into the schools, which is nothing more than investing in what they didn't invest in over the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. That's $200 million. It's a very, very long laundry list, but it's real, it's there, and if it's not fixed, the schools won't be able to open properly. The second issue is how do you control the spread of bad schools? We have 40 really bad schools in Detroit. We need to begin to close those bad schools and bring some discipline back into the system. And the difference between apparently the charter schools and our plan is that they want that to basically be voluntarily, and we want that to be mandatory.
All right, so Tonya, talk to me about how you would encourage people to support a Detroit Education Commission. Does the charter school operators, do they have a point in saying, well, maybe the DEC would choose to make DPS schools more successful or favorite them in some way? Right,
well, I want to say a couple things about that. The first is that people think it's the charter operators who are opposing the Detroit Education Commission, and in actuality, that's not true. So we have about half the operators in the city of Detroit who support the Detroit Education Commission as long as it's unbiased. So the people that are pushing against this is mostly the charter lobby. So I want to make that distinction. And the second thing is the way that we see this commission being appointed is that half of them would be charter advocates and involved in charter schools, and half in Detroit public schools, and one person who would be an expert on school accountability, so that you actually eliminate the bias out of that, and you have citizens who are deeply involved in these schools thinking about what's best for students, what's best for schools, and what's best for the city. So we believe that the bias question is going to be taken out, and it's really a moot point in our opinion.
So this is essentially accountability enforced by a government body. Is that the problem that the charters have with this, John?
That's what they say, and I'd like to point out that of those 40 bad schools, 31 of them are DPS schools, only 9 of them are charter. So this isn't just about charter schools, it's giving discipline within the public school system, the DPS system, to shed themselves of schools that aren't teaching the kids properly. So when you ask what the charters are worried about, quite frankly, you'll have to ask them, because this bill, in the final sense, is only for 5 years. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't have to be renewed.
And I think what people are looking at, Tonya, is that nothing else has worked here in Detroit in the last 20 years. So if you have some kind of oversight, which a lot of major cities do have with their urban school districts, that this could be something that could quite honestly be a positive move.
Right. What we basically have people arguing against is that we should keep the status quo, and that the status quo will miraculously work, and that we'll have better schools as a result of that. And we know that's not true. Actually, if you look over the last 20 years, we've seen performance decrease, and not only in DPS, but in charters on the whole. And charters do perform a little better than Detroit public schools, but the proficiency rate is at 14% when you look at the national average, which is in the 60s. So arguing that one is doing better than the other when you're both at the bottom of the, at the bottom of performance seems to me to be silly.
Yeah, you're parsing percentage points
right,
of how good
it's irresponsible
kids are doing.
And so we believe that this is a way, because we've seen it nationally, we know that this model works. It's a good way to be able to do just what John said. Close these low-performing schools and open the highest-performing schools, and placing them in parts of the city of Detroit that need schools.
That don't have a neighborhood school. John, and you and I had talked previously, and you're very passionate about the timing of this, and talking about how many kids the district or the city might lose come fall if we don't have some kind of plan in place, making sure that there is a successful education environment for kids in Detroit.
So we've gone from 160,000 kids in DPS to 45,000. Every year previous to the past two, we've lost anywhere from 9 to 15,000 kids per year, throws the district into enormous deficit. We've sort of bottomed out in the last 2 years based on good news, but all of that's evaporated in the last 90 days with a 2-day or 3-day teacher strike, with all the controversy on whether the school can afford to open in the fall, whether these bills will ever get passed or not. And so parents, those 45,000 parents, are asking themselves, should I be going back to public school? And in the past, they've said no. So we could be facing another financial crisis next June if we're not careful. And I also like to point out one other thing. You asked about being on the edge. We're on the edge as a society. This isn't just about education. There are 65,000 unfilled skilled jobs currently waiting for somebody in the state of Michigan. When you ask yourself, why is that? It's because the talent isn't there. It's either moved out or we're not educating enough as it is. And as a result, just think about a new company would like to go to another state. Would they ever come to Michigan knowing that there's a 65,000 job shortage? Companies moved into good labor markets, not bad labor markets. And so this has enormous consequences for our state budget, for the future of our state. We've had stagnant population growth for 30 years. We were 10 million people 30 years ago. We're 10 million people today. We're losing our place as a top 10 state in this country, and education is the root cause of that.
And it's and the education system, specifically in the city of Detroit, is a crucial key piece in the city rebounding as well.
Right. Well, I think when John talks about the instability and what's happening with families, basically what we're doing is creating education refugees. And, families have to find any place they can possibly go. And then the last thing is that I think that Detroit is the canary in the mine. So what is happening in Detroit is showing that all of these public policies and what their implications are across the state. There's not an urban district in our state that's more than a third of its size 15 years ago. And so we are seeing this disaggregation of our system, which is not a problem if we understand what it is and actually put solutions that will solve it. And we see, because we're not addressing that we're sliding down. So we're now number 42 or 43 in the state, and that was just from 38 about 5 years ago. So we see that we're having this decline, and we're projected to be 48th in the state, in the country rather, in the next few years if we don't do something different.
John, do you think this is going to get done this week in terms of what's kind of the rumblings or backroom conversations that you've been having with people in terms of the legislation in the House and in the Senate?
Something will get done. First of all, the state is mandated by the Constitution to open those schools. So at a minimum, they will have to provide the funding to open for a month at a time. That would be the minimum. That would be a disaster. It would not bode well for anybody wanting their kid to go back to that school.
Yeah, would you put your child in a school
of course.
month to month?
And that would unleash a whole set of forces. Who knows where it'll end up? So something will be get done. What we want is Senate Bill 710 and 711, which gives the community the opportunity to step back in, be responsible, be accountable, have some financial oversight from the Financial Review Commission, and let's move on and start to change the academics, the expectations of the performance of these kids.
All right, John Rakolta, Tonya Allen, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Christy.
Okay.